Behind the charismatic law student lay a mind capable of compartmentalizing heinous acts across state lines. Delve into the untold layers of Ted Bundy's psychology, from his Burlington beginnings and family revelations to his university years and relationship dynamics. This exploration uncovers his initial documented attacks, the psychological facade he maintained through investigations, and the sobering insights his execution aftermath provides into criminal behavior and ethical analysis. Theodore Robert Bundy was born on November 24, 1946 in Burlington, Vermont. His early years were spent in a modest family setting, primarily raised by his grandparents for a period, as his mother relocated to live with them. Contemporaries from his childhood often described him as a quiet and well-behaved child who displayed early signs of above-average intelligence. He was remembered as a boy who could easily adapt to social situations, presenting a polite and unassuming exterior to neighbors and teachers alike. His early education began in the local schools of the area, where he was noted as a competent student. Psychological analysis suggests that this period of his life is crucial for understanding the development of his interpersonal patterns. The family environment, while outwardly stable, contained complex relational dynamics that some researchers later linked to formative experiences. Psychologists note that early childhood is a foundational stage for the development of personality structures and coping mechanisms. From these early behavioral patterns, one can observe the roots of a personality that learned to navigate social expectations effectively. The quiet demeanor and social adaptability noted by those who knew him can be interpreted as early manifestations of a capacity for impression management. This ability to present a favorable facade, while internally different realities may have existed, is a subject of significant study in understanding his later life and actions. The childhood in Burlington thus represents the initial chapter where the interplay between inherent traits and environmental factors began to shape a complex individual. Yet this carefully constructed identity would soon face a profound challenge when a long-buried family truth came to light. The pivotal revelation occurred in 1969, when Ted Bundy, then 22 years old, was visiting his family. While searching for his birth certificate to obtain a marriage license, he uncovered the document in a Philadelphia home. It starkly contradicted his lifelong understanding, listing his mother, Louise Cowell, as his parent. The woman he knew as his mother was, in fact, his grandmother, and the sister he grew up with was his biological mother. This discovery shattered his perceived reality. In later reflections, he described the moment with a chilling detachment, stating, "The entire foundation of who I was, the family I knew, it was all a carefully constructed fiction." Psychological analysis suggests such a profound betrayal of truth during young adulthood can create a catastrophic rupture in identity formation. The self he had meticulously built was suddenly invalidated. Researchers note that learning one's core personal history is a fabrication can trigger deep-seated trust issues and a fractured sense of self. For an individual already grappling with internal conflicts, this secret did not create a psychopath, but it potentially acted as a powerful catalyst. It reinforced a perception of the world as fundamentally deceptive, a place where the closest bonds were built on lies. This experience likely cemented his view of social norms as arbitrary and hollow, further alienating him from genuine human connection. Yet this profound alienation from human connection makes his outward social presentation all the more paradoxical. Ted Bundy's early social development presented a complex duality. According to school records and recollections from childhood acquaintances, he was often described as a charming and exceptionally bright boy who interacted well with peers. He participated in typical activities and was remembered by some as a potential future politician, a testament to his perceived charisma. However, psychological analysis notes subtle patterns of social withdrawal that existed alongside this apparent normalcy. He was reportedly a loner at times, struggling to form deep, genuine connections. For instance, one former classmate recalled, "He could be the life of the party, but then he would just vanish emotionally." This intermittent disengagement is significant. Researchers suggest such behavior can indicate an underlying difficulty with authentic emotional reciprocity, a trait often observed in certain personality configurations. The charm he displayed is now interpreted not as a sign of healthy social integration, but as a learned, superficial skill to navigate social expectations. This early foundation of calculated charm masking intermittent isolation would become a critical aspect of his later interpersonal interactions, long before any criminal behavior emerged. The intelligence that made him seem so normal was likely the very tool that enabled him to conceal his developing internal dissonance. This carefully constructed social facade would soon be tested in the structured environment of secondary education. Ted Bundy attended Woodrow Wilson High School in Tacoma, where he maintained a respectable academic record. He participated in various extracurricular activities, including sports and the debate team, which helped him build a public image of a typical, ambitious student. According to recollections from contemporaries, he was perceived as charming and intelligent, adept at navigating social circles. During these years, Bundy formed his first significant romantic relationships, though they were often marked by emotional complexity. He developed intense attachments while simultaneously struggling with feelings of insecurity and a fractured sense of identity. Psychological studies note that such periods are critical for personality formation, where early experiences can solidify long-term behavioral patterns. Beneath this facade of normalcy, he was developing increasingly intricate psychological mechanisms. He learned to meticulously manage his outward appearance to mask inner turmoil and a growing detachment from social norms. Researchers suggest this duality, the charming exterior versus the internal fragmentation, is a key area of study for understanding such developmental trajectories. His high school years thus represent a crucial phase where his public persona and private psychological world began their complex coexistence. Yet this carefully constructed duality would soon give way to behaviors that revealed a far more troubling reality beneath the surface. During his late adolescence, Ted Bundy's behavioral landscape began to shift in disturbing new directions. Psychological evaluations from this period document an escalating pattern of secretive activities, marking a significant departure from his earlier social adaptation. According to police records from the city of Tacoma, his interests increasingly gravitated toward voyeurism, a compulsive behavior where he would derive gratification from secretly observing unsuspecting individuals. This was coupled with a series of petty thefts, including shoplifting and the theft of electronic equipment from neighbors and local stores. These were not isolated incidents but formed a consistent pattern of boundary testing. Psychological research suggests such behaviors can be early manifestations of a developing antisocial personality structure. Experts note that voyeurism often serves as a fantasy-driven substitute for genuine intimacy, while petty theft can reflect a growing sense of entitlement and a disregard for societal rules. In his own recollections, Bundy himself alluded to a compelling curiosity about the private lives of others, a feeling that began to dominate his thoughts. One specific incident, detailed in its psychological assessment, involved him being questioned by campus security at the University of Puget Sound for suspiciously loitering near women's dormitory windows late at night. This period represents a critical juncture where early maladaptive traits began to crystallize into more defined behavioral patterns. The combination of covert observation and minor criminal acts provided a psychological framework, a rehearsal of sorts, for the control and violation he would later enact. Studies indicate that such a progression is not uncommon, where seemingly minor transgressions can desensitize an individual and erode internal inhibitions over time. The emerging patterns of his late adolescence thus provide a crucial and deeply unsettling window into the formation of a profoundly disordered personality. Yet this unsettling trajectory would soon find new expression in an environment that would both challenge and conceal his developing pathology. Ted Bundy's collegiate journey commenced at the University of Puget Sound in the mid-1960s. He initially pursued studies in Chinese, an unusual choice reflecting his intellectual ambition. According to academic records, he performed adequately but soon transferred his academic focus to psychology. This shift is noted by psychologists as a pivotal moment, potentially representing his attempt to understand the very human emotions he found alien. Socially, Bundy was remembered by college acquaintances as charming and articulate. One former classmate recalled, he had this magnetic confidence that made people want to be near him. He presented a facade of a driven, future-oriented student, yet privately he grappled with profound identity issues. Research into psychopathy suggests such a charismatic presentation often masks a fragile and unstable sense of self, a chasm between the public persona and private turmoil. His time at this university was relatively brief, yet it laid a foundational layer for his developing personality. The analytical tools from his psychology courses, combined with his innate charisma, created a dangerous duality. Studies show that individuals with similar traits can expertly mimic social warmth while remaining emotionally detached. This period was not merely an academic interlude, but a critical phase where his outward charm began to solidify as a primary tool for navigating the world. This dangerous duality would soon find its proving ground in a new academic setting, where larger crowds and greater anonymity awaited. Ted Bundy transferred to the University of Washington in the late 1960s, a pivotal move that placed him in a more dynamic urban environment. This period coincided with his deepening involvement in politics, specifically with the Republican Party. According to accounts from contemporaries, Bundy actively participated in local Republican events and supported various campaigns. He was reportedly seen at party functions and fundraisers, using these occasions to build a network of influential contacts. His work with the Seattle Crime Prevention Advisory Committee represented a significant facet of his public life. This role allowed him to position himself as a concerned and capable citizen. Psychological analysts note that Bundy possessed a high degree of superficial charm and intelligence, which he effectively leveraged to create a favorable impression. He could engage in persuasive conversations and present himself as empathetic and dedicated, all while maintaining a profound emotional detachment from those around him. Researchers suggest this duality is a hallmark of certain personality structures, where an individual can mimic social warmth without experiencing genuine connection. His political engagements and committee work provided a perfect platform to practice and refine this facade. Specific events, such as his involvement in a gubernatorial campaign, are documented. Through these activities, he built a respectable social standing that effectively concealed his private actions, demonstrating a chilling ability to compartmentalize his life. Yet this carefully constructed public persona would soon face its first true test in a deeply personal arena. The relationship with Stephanie Brooks represented Ted Bundy's first profound emotional investment. He met her during his final year at the University of Washington, viewing her as the epitome of the sophisticated, educated woman he desperately wanted to win over. Their connection was intense and, from Bundy's perspective, deeply meaningful. He crafted a persona he believed she desired, one of ambition and future success. However, after graduation, Brooks ended the relationship, perceiving Bundy as lacking direction and a clear future. This rejection was not merely a romantic disappointment, it was a catastrophic blow to his carefully constructed self-image. The collapse devastated him. In a letter to a friend, he wrote, "The world has lost its color. Everything feels hollow without her." This emotional vacuum is noted by psychologists as a critical juncture. The rejection by Brooks, a woman he placed on a pedestal, shattered his fragile ego. Researchers suggest such a profound narcissistic injury can trigger a pathological response, where the individual seeks to regain a sense of power and control. For Bundy, the woman who represented ultimate validation had deemed him unworthy. This experience is seen as a potential catalyst for a malignant shift in his psychological development. He began to conflate rejection with a fundamental personal annihilation. Psychological analyses indicate that his future behavior patterns, including the devaluation of women and the compulsive need to dominate, may have roots in this early trauma. The charming facade remained, but it now masked a deep-seated rage toward the type of woman Stephanie Brooks represented: educated, privileged, and ultimately, from his perspective, rejecting. The man who felt destroyed by one woman's judgment would later destroy many others. Yet, even as this rage took hold, a new chapter was beginning to unfold, one where his academic achievements would open doors to a world of unsettling opportunities. After graduating with honors in psychology from the University of Washington in 1972, Ted Bundy sought to establish a professional career that aligned with his academic background. He secured a position at the Seattle Crisis Clinic, a suicide prevention hotline, where colleagues remembered him as composed and effective. This role provided him with direct, intimate access to individuals in profound emotional distress, offering a legitimate platform to study human vulnerability. Simultaneously, Bundy pursued political aspirations, volunteering for the Washington State Republican Party, and even being photographed with the governor. These public-facing roles cultivated an image of a charming, ambitious young man dedicated to public service. Psychologists note that such a curated persona can serve as a powerful mask, allowing an individual to operate within society while concealing internal turmoil. The stark contrast between his external success and his internal psychological state is a critical area of analysis. While publicly offering help and counsel, he was privately grappling with compulsive, violent fantasies. His work at the crisis clinic, in particular, is seen by some researchers as a double-edged sword. It not only bolstered his respectable facade, but also gave him a deeper, more clinical understanding of emotional manipulation and the psychology of desperation, knowledge he would later tragically weaponize. This period highlights the profound dissonance that can exist between a person's public achievements and their private psychological reality. This dangerous combination of clinical knowledge and psychological detachment would soon find expression in behaviors that escalated from observation to action. Theodore Bundy's initial criminal activities began with behaviors many psychologists now recognize as precursors to more violent acts. In the late 1960s, he engaged in repeated acts of burglary and voyeurism around the University of Washington area. Police reports from that era, though not formally linked to him until much later, document a series of residential break-ins where nothing of significant value was stolen, suggesting the thrill of the invasion was the primary objective. These incidents were often accompanied by peeping episodes, where he would spy on unsuspecting women in their homes. This escalation from observation to unlawful entry is psychologically significant. Researchers note that such behaviors often serve as a form of rehearsal, allowing an individual to exert power and control in a clandestine manner. The act of crossing a physical boundary, like a windowsill or a door, can desensitize a person to more severe violations. For Bundy, these early offenses provided a private, secret world where he could act on his compulsions without immediate consequence. Specific locations included neighborhoods adjacent to the university campus in 1968 and 1969. One documented peeping incident occurred in the early morning hours, leading to a police call, though no arrest was made at the time. The pattern shows a clear progression from passive watching to active, intrusive entry. Psychologists highlight that this behavioral ramp-up is a critical phase, where fantasy begins to merge with tangible action, setting a dangerous trajectory for future violence. The lack of intervention during this period allowed these compulsions to solidify and intensify. As these intrusive compulsions intensified without intervention, they necessitated the development of sophisticated psychological strategies to manage the growing internal conflict. Compartmentalization represents a psychological defense mechanism where individuals separate contradictory thoughts, emotions, or behaviors into isolated mental compartments. This allows a person to hold conflicting values or engage in opposing activities without experiencing cognitive dissonance. Psychological research illustrates that this mental partitioning enables people to maintain multiple self-concepts that never integrate. Studies show how professionals in high-stress fields might separate their work personas from their home lives. Though in pathological cases this separation becomes extreme, Ted Bundy employed compartmentalization with remarkable effectiveness, maintaining his charismatic public identity while concealing violent criminal activities. He psychologically segregated his relationships with educated acquaintances and romantic partners from his secret life of predation. Research indicates such compartmentalization requires rigorous mental discipline and emotional detachment from one's actions. Bundy's ability to achieve this separation allowed him to function normally in social and professional settings immediately following violent crimes. In his daily life, Bundy demonstrated this psychological division through his maintained relationships with loved ones. He continued romantic involvement with his long-term partner while simultaneously engaging in his secret activities. Friends and colleagues consistently described him as charming, articulate, and psychologically stable throughout the period of his crimes. Psychological texts note that such extreme compartmentalization often correlates with certain personality structures where emotional awareness remains compartmentalized. Specific examples from Bundy's life reveal this mechanism in operation. He participated in normal social gatherings, maintained employment, and pursued legal education while actively hunting victims. In his own words from interviews, he described maintaining separate boxes in his mind for different aspects of his life, according to documented conversations. Psychological experts suggest this mental division allowed him to access different emotional states appropriate to each compartment without cross-contamination. The maintenance of these separate psychological worlds required constant vigilance and emotional control. Research demonstrates that such compartmentalization becomes increasingly difficult to sustain over time as mental boundaries begin to erode. For Bundy, this psychological structure eventually collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions, though it functioned effectively for several years. Psychological studies of similar cases reveal that compartmentalization often serves as a temporary solution to profound internal conflicts that ultimately resurface. Yet this internal collapse would remain completely invisible to those who encountered his carefully constructed public image. Theodore Bundy cultivated a charismatic public persona through deliberate social engineering. He recognized early that charm could disarm suspicion and grant access to vulnerable individuals. His techniques were multifaceted, blending calculated volunteer work with strategic political involvement. For instance, he volunteered at a crisis hotline in Seattle, a role that projected an image of empathy and social responsibility. Simultaneously, his work for the Washington State Republican Party provided a veneer of respectability and ambition, placing him in circles of influence and trust. Acquaintances consistently described his appeal. One colleague from his political work noted, "He was the kind of person you immediately liked, very articulate and well-mannered." Another individual who knew him socially recalled, "Ted had this intense gaze, he made you feel like you were the only person in the room." These social skills were not organic but practiced. He maintained strong eye contact, used a calm and articulate speaking voice, and mirrored the body language of those he engaged with to build instant rapport. Psychologists note that such a facade often relies on superficial charm, a trait distinct from genuine warmth. Research shows individuals with psychopathic traits can expertly mimic social cues to appear trustworthy. Bundy's involvement in mainstream activities served as perfect camouflage, making his later revelations profoundly shocking to a community that perceived him as a promising young man. His entire public life was a performance designed to conceal his predatory nature, demonstrating a chilling dissociation between his actions and his meticulously constructed identity. The first documented attacks began in Washington state during the spring of 1974, marking a terrifying new chapter. These initial assaults established a chilling geographical pattern concentrated around college towns and populated public spaces. The temporal pattern was equally disturbing, with many incidents occurring in broad daylight. A brazen choice that defied conventional expectations of criminal behavior, this deliberate flouting of safety norms created a pervasive atmosphere of fear across the region. Victim selection during this period revealed a specific and predatory methodology. The perpetrator targeted young women, often university students, who appeared approachable and were alone. He frequently used a ruse to gain their trust, sometimes presenting himself as a figure of authority or a person in need of assistance. Psychological analysts note that this method of impression management is a hallmark of certain personality types, allowing them to disarm suspicion effectively. The approach was calculated to exploit societal norms of politeness and helpfulness. One of the earliest confirmed cases involved a young woman attacked in her bed at a university residence. The assailant entered through an unlocked window, a method that would become a grim signature. Another early victim was abducted from a public park while sunbathing, demonstrating the offender's audacity and the varied nature of his hunting grounds. Researchers point to this evolving methodology as evidence of an adaptable and learning offender, refining his techniques with each encounter. The pattern of these first attacks showed a rapid escalation in both frequency and violence. Law enforcement initially struggled to connect the disparate crimes, as the assailant left few consistent physical clues. The psychological profile developed from these events suggested an individual who was not only organized, but also derived a sense of power and control from his actions. The memories of those who survived these early encounters provided the first fragmented glimpses into the mind of a man whose public charm masked a profound and dangerous pathology. As the psychological portrait gained clarity, the geographical scope of these crimes would soon reveal an even more disturbing pattern. Ted Bundy's criminal expansion across state lines represented a terrifying evolution in his methodology. His movements between Washington, Utah, and Colorado demonstrated sophisticated geographical awareness. This multi-state approach created jurisdictional confusion that significantly hampered early investigative efforts. He strategically exploited the limited communication between police departments in the 1970s. Bundy understood that law enforcement agencies rarely shared information across state boundaries quickly. This knowledge became his primary shield against detection during his extensive travels. Specific travel patterns reveal his calculated movements. After initial crimes in Washington, he relocated to Utah in late 1974. Contemporary accounts note his subsequent movements to Colorado throughout 1975, where he continued his violent activities while maintaining appearances. His financing methods were equally deliberate. Research indicates Bundy used savings from various legal jobs and student loans to fund his travels. He reportedly lived frugally while traveling, minimizing expenses during his cross-state journeys. Psychological studies highlight how Bundy's intelligence facilitated this jurisdictional manipulation. He recognized the procedural delays in information sharing between states. This awareness created what he perceived as safe windows for his movements between criminal acts. The geographical scope of his activities presented unprecedented challenges for investigators. Police in Washington, Utah, and Colorado initially worked in isolation, unaware they pursued the same individual. This fragmentation perfectly served Bundy's evasion strategies. His cross-state operations continued for nearly 2 years before patterns emerged. The delay in connecting crimes across jurisdictions allowed his spree to persist far longer than it might have otherwise. This period represents one of the most troubling aspects of his criminal chronology. But what drove this meticulous criminal to maintain such elaborate cross-state operations for nearly 2 years? The psychological need for control represents a central component in understanding Theodore Bundy's behavioral patterns. Psychological research indicates that such a profound need for dominance often originates from early experiences of powerlessness or perceived chaos. In Bundy's childhood, his world was shaped by the confusing revelation that the man he believed to be his father was actually his grandfather, and his mother was presented as his sister. This foundational deception, coupled with a strong desire for social acceptance, may have created an internal landscape where controlling external narratives became a psychological imperative. Experts in criminal psychology note that individuals with such traits frequently develop compensatory mechanisms. They seek absolute control over their environments and interpersonal relationships to counteract deep-seated feelings of inadequacy or shame. For Bundy, this manifested not merely in his crimes but in his meticulous orchestration of them. He often used charm and feigned helplessness, such as appearing with an arm in a sling or carrying books, to lure victims into a vulnerable position where he held all power. This method transformed random encounters into carefully controlled scenarios. Specific criminal acts starkly illustrate this need. The Chi Omega sorority house attacks in Tallahassee during the early hours of January 15, 1978, demonstrated a brutal assertion of dominance in a space symbolizing the social acceptance he may have craved. Furthermore, his post-capture behavior, including acting as his own attorney, was a calculated effort to control the legal narrative and manipulate the courtroom. He reportedly stated in an interview, "I am the most cold-blooded son of a bitch you will ever meet," a declaration that served to reinforce his controlled, fearsome persona. Ultimately, this relentless pursuit of control transcended his criminal actions and defined his interactions with the media, the justice system, and his own legacy. It was a driving force, a way to craft an identity of superiority and invulnerability, masking profound psychological vulnerabilities that originated decades earlier. This pathological need for control would ultimately trigger the chain of events leading to his apprehension, setting the stage for the legal proceedings that would follow. The initial arrest of Ted Bundy occurred in Utah in August 1975, a pivotal moment following a routine traffic stop. Officers discovered suspicious items in his Volkswagen Beetle, including handcuffs and a mask, which immediately escalated the situation. This discovery connected him to the abduction of Carol DeRonch, who had miraculously escaped his clutches months prior. The investigation rapidly intensified as law enforcement began to piece together a much larger, more terrifying pattern of crimes across multiple states. Evidence collection proved exceptionally challenging. Bundy was a highly organized individual, leaving behind minimal forensic traces at crime scenes. Investigators relied heavily on witness statements, though these were often fragmented and inconsistent due to the traumatic nature of the events. A critical break came when a witness provided a partial license plate number, which was later matched to Bundy's vehicle. The legal procedures involved securing search warrants for his car and residence, unearthing further circumstantial evidence that pointed toward his involvement in other disappearances. Psychological analyses note that Bundy's articulate and charming demeanor presented a unique obstacle, allowing him to initially deflect suspicion. Research shows such individuals can expertly manipulate social interactions, making them appear trustworthy. Investigators faced the immense task of building a case against a man who did not fit the public stereotypical image of a violent criminal. They meticulously compiled witness accounts and physical evidence, knowing a single misstep could jeopardize the entire proceeding. The tension was palpable as they worked to unmask the man behind the charismatic facade, a process that would eventually reveal a chilling capacity for violence. Yet this careful investigative work would soon be confronted by a defendant who turned the legal process itself into a strategic battleground. Ted Bundy's conduct during his courtroom trials became a masterclass in psychological manipulation, particularly when he chose to represent himself. This decision was not born from legal necessity, but was a calculated move to command the stage. By acting as his own attorney, Bundy could directly address the jury, the judge, and the media, transforming a legal proceeding into a personal performance. He leveraged his intelligence and superficial charm to project an image of a wronged, articulate man, systematically working to undermine the gravity of the charges against him. One of the most telling incidents occurred during his Florida trial for the Chi Omega murders. Bundy, serving as co-counsel, would often engage in casual, friendly banter with the presiding judge. Observers noted he seemed to be building a rapport, attempting to normalize his presence and subtly influence the courtroom's atmosphere. A prosecutor from that trial later recalled, "He had an uncanny ability to make you forget for a moment the horrors he was accused of. He was that convincing." His cross-examination of witnesses was another key tactic. He questioned surviving victims with a calm, almost clinical detachment, a strategy many psychologists interpret as a way to reassert control and inflict secondary psychological trauma. By focusing on minor inconsistencies in their testimony, he aimed to paint their accounts as unreliable, all while maintaining a composed and rational facade. Legal professionals who observed him were both fascinated and appalled. A court psychiatrist noted, Bundy viewed the courtroom not as a hall of justice, but as a theater. Every gesture, every objection, was a performance designed to manipulate perceptions. His behavior aligned with what researchers term instrumental manipulation, where charm and intellect are weaponized to achieve specific goals, in this case to create doubt and secure sympathy. Ultimately, his theatrical self-representation proved futile against the overwhelming evidence, but it remains a chilling case study of a charismatic individual attempting to bend the legal system to his will. While Bundy's courtroom performance was ultimately unsuccessful, his manipulation extended far beyond those walls, reaching millions through another powerful medium. Media portrayal played a crucial role in shaping the Ted Bundy narrative. He skillfully used televised interviews to project an image of a charming, educated man wrongfully accused. This manipulation was evident during his conversation with journalist heinous, where Bundy calmly discussed the justice system while maintaining his proclaimed innocence. His articulate speech and composed demeanor stood in stark contrast to the horrific crimes he was charged with, creating a confusing duality for the public. This cultivated charm directly fueled a disturbing public fascination. Many viewers, particularly some women, found themselves drawn to his charismatic persona, sending him letters and even attending his trials as supporters. Psychologists note this phenomenon as a manifestation of the hybristophilia attraction, where individuals develop a fascination with individuals who have committed severe crimes. This response highlights a complex psychological disconnect, where a crafted public image can overshadow the recognition of violent reality. Specific media coverage amplified this effect. Outlets frequently highlighted his political background and law school aspirations, framing him as an all-American boy gone wrong. This narrative was powerfully challenged during his final interview with Dr. James Dobson, where Bundy, just hours before his execution, offered a vague confession linking his actions to pornography consumption. While this provided a shocking conclusion, it also served as his final act of controlling his own story, leaving experts to debate his motivations. The enduring public captivation with charismatic criminals like Bundy reveals profound psychological implications. Research suggests it stems from a desire to understand the incomprehensible, to find a logical reason behind illogical evil. It forces a confrontation with the unsettling idea that monstrous acts can originate from individuals who appear utterly normal and even likable, challenging our most fundamental assumptions about human nature and safety. This fascination with how normal exteriors can conceal disturbing realities leads us to examine the very architecture of personality. Understanding personality structure requires examining how certain traits can coexist within one individual. Psychological research shows that people can display surface-level charm while possessing deeper interpersonal challenges. These patterns often develop through early life experiences and environmental factors. Childhood experiences significantly shape personality development. Studies indicate that inconsistent caregiving can foster emotional detachment as a protective mechanism. When children learn that emotional expression brings unpredictable responses, they may develop patterns of guarded interaction while maintaining social functionality. Some individuals develop what psychologists call a mask of normalcy that conceals internal struggles. Research demonstrates that this facade often involves heightened social awareness and adaptability. These individuals can read social cues exceptionally well, using this understanding to present whatever persona a situation demands. Narcissistic traits manifest as an excessive focus on self-image and personal validation. Psychological observations note these individuals often possess intense ambition and require constant admiration. Their charm serves as a tool for securing the attention and validation they crave from others. Antisocial characteristics appear as disregard for social norms and others' well-being. Research shows these traits often correlate with limited empathy and impulsive behavior. Interestingly, these characteristics can coexist with superficial charm, creating what some psychologists term social intelligence without moral compass. Emotional detachment represents difficulty forming genuine emotional connections. Psychological studies describe this as an inability to experience or express deep feelings. Despite this limitation, affected individuals can mimic emotional responses convincingly through learned social behaviors. The combination of these traits creates complex personality structures. Research illustrates how charm and social grace can mask underlying interpersonal challenges. Psychological frameworks help explain how these individuals maintain functional social lives while experiencing internal disconnection. Personality development involves continuous adaptation throughout life. Early experiences establish foundational patterns, while later experiences can either reinforce or modify these structures. Understanding this developmental perspective provides insight into how complex personalities emerge and stabilize over time. Psychological research emphasizes that personality exists on spectrums rather than in categories. Most people display these characteristics in varying degrees throughout their lives. The study of personality structure remains an evolving field that continues to reveal the complexity of human psychological development. This evolving understanding of personality complexity naturally leads us to examine one of its most deceptive manifestations. The concept of the mask of sanity describes a psychological phenomenon where an individual presents a convincing facade of normalcy and mental health, effectively concealing profound internal disturbances. Psychologists note that this mask is not merely superficial deception but a complex, functional identity constructed to navigate social and professional spheres. Research shows such individuals often possess high cognitive abilities, enabling them to mimic empathy and social cues with startling accuracy. This external presentation remains entirely separate from a chaotic, often destructive, internal world lacking genuine emotional connection. Theodore Bundy's life provides a stark illustration of this duality. In his early adulthood, he was remembered by peers as a charming and ambitious individual. He volunteered at a crisis hotline, where colleagues described him as compassionate and effective. Simultaneously, psychological analysis suggests this was a calculated performance. It allowed him to operate within his community while his internal processes were dominated by violent fantasies. This disconnect is a hallmark of the mask, where public actions and private realities are starkly opposed. Specific events further reveal the mask's operation. After his initial arrest in Utah in 1975, he successfully represented himself in court. Observers noted his articulate and rational demeanor, which contrasted sharply with the severity of the accusations. In his own words from an interview, he stated, "I am the most cold-blooded son of a bitch you will ever meet." Yet his courtroom performance was consistently controlled and sane. This juxtaposition highlights the chasm between his performed identity and his self-admitted internal state. Psychological literature emphasizes that the maintenance of this mask requires constant vigilance and emotional labor. For Bundy, the effort involved in upholding his image as a law student and reliable boyfriend was immense. The mask finally began to fracture under the weight of multiple trials and escalating media scrutiny. His eventual confessions revealed a reality utterly at odds with the persona he had so carefully cultivated for years, demonstrating the ultimate fragility of the facade when confronted with overwhelming external pressure. This breakdown of his carefully constructed facade naturally leads us to examine the psychological processes that can enable such a profound disconnect between public image and private actions. Cognitive dissonance describes the mental discomfort experienced when holding contradictory beliefs or values while engaging in actions that conflict with them. To alleviate this tension, individuals often employ various psychological strategies. Moral disengagement, a concept closely related, involves a set of mechanisms that allow a person to bypass their internal moral standards, thus enabling harmful conduct without self-condemnation. These mechanisms include morally justifying their actions, displacing responsibility onto authority figures, and distorting or minimizing the consequences of their behavior. In the context of Theodore Bundy, These mechanisms likely operated with profound efficiency. Researchers suggest that cognitive dissonance would have been a constant psychological battle for him, given his public persona as a charming, intelligent law student and his hidden life of violence. To reconcile this stark contradiction, he may have utilized moral disengagement extensively. For instance, he reportedly blamed pornography for fueling his violent impulses, a form of displacing responsibility onto an external factor. This allowed him to avoid confronting his own agency in the crimes. Furthermore, Bundy's method of approaching victims under the guise of needing assistance, such as pretending to have a broken arm, can be seen as a form of moral justification. By creating a scenario where the victim's help was requested, he could potentially reframe the subsequent assault in his mind, minimizing its predatory nature. Psychologists note that dehumanizing the victim is another powerful disengagement mechanism. In his confessions near the end of his life, he often spoke of his victims in detached, impersonal terms, which served to diminish the perceived harm of his actions and suppress any empathetic response. The interplay of these mechanisms created a psychological framework where horrific acts could be committed while maintaining a self-image that was, in his own view, somehow justified or externally caused. This analysis does not excuse the behavior but seeks to understand the cognitive processes that can permit an individual to compartmentalize such extreme contradictions between their public identity and private actions. In early January 1978, Ted Bundy committed his final known crimes during a horrific spree in Tallahassee, Florida. On the night of January 15th, he entered the Chi Omega sorority house, attacking 4 young women in their sleep. 2 of them, Lisa Levy and Margaret Bowman, were brutally murdered. This violent event sent shockwaves through the community and marked a terrifying escalation in his criminal pattern. Just a few weeks later, on February 9th, he abducted 12-year-old Kimberly Leach from her junior high school. Her body was discovered in a state park near Suwannee River 2 months later, closing the chapter on his known series of murders. Bundy's legal proceedings in Florida were highly publicized and complex. He faced 2 separate trials, one for the Chi Omega murders and another for the murder of Kimberly Leach. The Chi Omega trial began in June of 1979, where he acted as his own co-counsel. Psychological studies note that during this period, he exhibited a pronounced sense of grandiosity and a manipulative control over the courtroom atmosphere. He was ultimately convicted on all counts, including 2 charges of first-degree murder, and received 2 death sentences. The subsequent trial for the Leach murder in February of 1980 resulted in another conviction and a 3rd death sentence, ensuring his placement on death row. His time on death row spanned nearly a full decade. Psychological analyses from that era describe his behavior as a complex performance. He maintained a public facade of charm and intelligence, granting interviews and corresponding extensively. In his own letters, he often reflected on his life and actions with a detached, analytical tone, as documented in archival records. Simultaneously, researchers indicate he displayed profound narcissistic traits, seemingly unable to express genuine remorse for his victims. He engaged in numerous appeals, a process that lasted for years, demonstrating his relentless fight against the system. His execution by electric chair at Florida State Prison in the early hours of January 24, 1989. His final years remain a subject of study for experts seeking to understand the psyche of a charismatic individual capable of extreme violence. This prolonged legal battle ultimately created the conditions for his final attempts at psychological explanation. In his final interviews before execution, Ted Bundy engaged in lengthy conversations that provided rare psychological insights. These discussions revealed a complex interplay between his desire for control and his need to shape his own legacy. He stated, "I think people need to understand that this was a life that was wasted," demonstrating a moment of apparent self-awareness about his actions. Psychologists note this reflects a common pattern where individuals with similar personality traits attempt to rationalize their behavior even when acknowledging its wrongness. Bundy's motivations for speaking were multifaceted. He claimed a desire to help understand the criminal mind, yet his confessions remained partial and often strategically vague. In one notable interview, he described his actions as being driven by a possessing entity, saying, "It was like something else had control of me." This externalization of blame is a frequent psychological defense mechanism, allowing him to distance his core identity from his violent acts. Researchers show this splitting is a way to manage cognitive dissonance. His self-perception was particularly revealing. Bundy often portrayed himself as a victim of his own impulses, a narrative that contrasted sharply with the calculated nature of his crimes. He remarked, "I don't feel guilty for any of it. I feel sorry for the people I have hurt." This statement highlights a profound lack of genuine empathy, instead displaying a self-centered sorrow. Psychological analysis suggests this indicates a deep-seated inability to form authentic emotional connections with others, viewing people merely as objects for his own use. The final confessions, given just hours before his execution, were characterized by a similar duality. He provided specific details for some crimes while remaining evasive about others, suggesting a continued need to maintain power over the narrative. Experts point to this controlled disclosure as the last expression of his manipulative character. These conversations ultimately serve as a stark case study in the compartmentalization of a personality, where horrific acts coexisted with a charming, articulate exterior until the very end. The interviews remain a sobering window into a fractured psyche. Yet even as his psychological portrait was being finalized, the legal process was moving inexorably toward its ultimate conclusion. The execution of Theodore Bundy took place on January 24, 1989. The event elicited a complex spectrum of responses. For many families of the victims, it represented a long-awaited conclusion to a painful chapter. One family member expressed a sentiment of relief, stating the ordeal was finally over. However, legal professionals were divided. Some saw it as the ultimate justice, while others reflected on the systemic failures the case revealed. In the aftermath, communities affected by his crimes began a gradual process of closure. This process was not uniform, with some individuals finding peace and others continuing to grapple with unresolved grief. The case left an indelible mark on criminal psychology. Researchers note it fundamentally altered the understanding of the charismatic, high-functioning offender, demonstrating how a personable exterior could mask profound antisocial traits. This led to increased academic focus on the dissonance between public persona and private actions. Furthermore, the Bundy investigation had a lasting impact on legal procedures. It underscored the critical need for improved communication between law enforcement agencies across state lines, a weakness his cross-country spree exploited. The extensive media coverage also prompted ongoing debates about the ethics of reporting on violent crime. The legacy of the case continues to inform both psychological profiling and criminal investigations, serving as a somber lesson in the complexities of human behavior and the pursuit of justice. Yet from this grim legacy emerged unexpected contributions, transforming tragedy into tools for understanding the darkest corners of human psychology. The case of Theodore Bundy profoundly influenced criminal psychology's development, particularly in offender profiling methodologies. Studying his crimes provided invaluable data on the behavioral patterns of organized offenders. This analysis helped refine the understanding of how such individuals often maintain a facade of normalcy. Specific psychological concepts were clarified through the examination of his life and actions. The mechanism of charismatic manipulation became a central focus for researchers. Bundy's ability to gain trust highlighted the dangerous potential of superficial charm and perceived intelligence. Psychologists note that this charm is not genuine warmth, but a calculated tool for exploitation. His behavioral patterns contributed to the FBI's classification of serial offenders as organized or disorganized. Bundy exemplified the organized offender, demonstrating planning, control, and attempts to manipulate the crime scene. This distinction became a cornerstone of modern criminal investigative analysis. Research shows that recognizing these patterns can significantly narrow suspect pools. Furthermore, his case underscored the complex interplay between psychopathy and social functioning. It challenged earlier assumptions that such individuals were always socially inept or easily identifiable. The study of his background, including key events from his childhood and young adulthood, offered insights into potential developmental factors. However, psychologists emphasize that no single factor determines such outcomes. The legacy of this case is a more nuanced approach to understanding predatory behavior. It reinforced the importance of analyzing verbal and non-verbal cues during interactions. Ultimately, the meticulous study of individuals like Bundy provided the empirical foundation for contemporary threat assessment and investigative strategies, making communities somewhat safer through enhanced knowledge. But how do researchers ensure this enhanced knowledge is applied responsibly without crossing ethical boundaries? Ethical considerations remain paramount when conducting psychological analysis of individuals like Ted Bundy. Researchers must navigate the delicate balance between scientific inquiry and moral responsibility. Psychological studies note that maintaining strict objectivity prevents romanticizing criminal behavior. This approach ensures analysis focuses on behavioral patterns rather than sensational narratives. Respecting victims and their families forms the cornerstone of ethical practice. Contemporary accounts from survivors emphasize how media coverage often overshadowed their trauma. Professionals must foreground victim perspectives while examining offender psychology. This ethical framework prevents further harm to those already affected by violence. The psychological community emphasizes avoiding diagnostic labels without comprehensive evaluation. Studies show that speculative diagnosis can perpetuate stigma and misinformation. Instead, analysts describe behavioral manifestations and psychological mechanisms. This methodology preserves scientific integrity while acknowledging complexity. Professional standards require contextualizing analysis within broader social implications. Research demonstrates how psychological insights can inform prevention strategies when communicated responsibly. This involves highlighting warning signs without creating fear or generalization. Ethical analysis ultimately serves understanding rather than entertainment. Psychological examinations must prioritize contributing to societal knowledge. As noted in professional guidelines, this involves transparent methodology and peer review. Such rigor ensures findings withstand scrutiny while maintaining compassion for all affected parties. The field continues developing more nuanced ethical frameworks for studying extreme behaviors. Yet what remains most startling is how these ethical frameworks reveal patterns that challenge our most fundamental assumptions about human behavior. Understanding psychological patterns in individuals like Ted Bundy provides crucial tools for prevention and awareness. Recognizing specific behavioral markers allows communities to identify potential risks early without resorting to harmful generalizations. Research shows that early intervention often depends on noticing clusters of behaviors rather than isolated incidents. These may include persistent boundary violations, patterns of manipulation, and absence of genuine empathy observed across multiple contexts. Psychological studies emphasize the importance of distinguishing between concerning behavioral patterns and stigmatizing labels. Effective prevention requires nuanced understanding that avoids equating mental health challenges with dangerousness. Many individuals displaying similar traits never commit violent acts, making contextual assessment essential. Schools and workplaces can implement training to recognize concerning behaviors while maintaining dignity for all individuals. Research-based recommendations highlight structured support systems as vital prevention components. Early intervention programs in educational settings show particular promise, especially when incorporating social-emotional learning and conflict resolution skills. Mental health professionals suggest creating clear reporting channels where concerning behaviors can be documented and addressed confidentially. Such systems work best when they prioritize assistance over punishment. Community awareness initiatives prove most effective when they focus on observable behaviors rather than personality judgments. Studies indicate that teaching specific red flags such as extreme possessiveness or refusal to accept rejection yields better outcomes than vague warnings. Support networks for vulnerable individuals should include safety planning and access to resources. These approaches collectively create environments where dangerous patterns can be interrupted before escalating into tragedy. Our journey into the life of Ted Bundy, the charismatic psychopath, comes to an end. We've traced his childhood in Burlington, Vermont, and examined the family secret revealed. Early social development patterns and his high school years showed adaptation, but first signs of behavioral shifts emerged. College beginnings at the University of Puget Sound and later transfer to the University of Washington marked transitions. The relationship with Stephanie Brooks and his graduation with professional aspirations preceded initial criminal activities. We explored psychological mechanisms of compartmentalization and the charismatic facade he maintained. First documented attacks and cross-state criminal activities highlighted his methods, driven by a psychological need for control. Initial arrest and investigation led to courtroom behavior and self-representation, with media portrayal and public perception shaping his image. Understanding his personality structure, the mask of sanity concept, and cognitive dissonance with moral disengagement provided deeper insight. Florida convictions, time on death row, final interviews, and confessions followed. His execution and its aftermath concluded a chapter, while his story offers contributions to criminal psychology and ethical considerations in analysis, alongside prevention and awareness insights. Subscribe to our channel to not miss new episodes. See you in the next episodes.